In the far distance of deep space there was silence, an endless sea of darkness broken only by the glow of dying stars. Inside that silence, a weak signal began to travel, faint and broken, almost lost among the waves of cosmic noise. It was an SOS, an old emergency code, a desperate call for help from a place no one had heard from in months. The message came from a small colony named Alaris 9, a planet known for its harsh weather, thin air, and constant danger. Most people had already given up on it. The colony had stopped sending updates, their communication systems were dead, and the official records listed them as unresponsive. To most, that meant only one thing: everyone there was gone. But one woman refused to believe it. Her name was Lyra Denev, a communication technician stationed at an isolated listening post on the far edge of known space. Her days were usually silent, spent watching screens and reading data logs that almost never changed. She had been assigned there because no one else wanted the job. It was lonely, routine, and far from home. But on one cold night, as she sat sipping recycled water and staring at static, something unusual appeared on her monitor. A faint pattern in the noise, 3 short beeps, 3 long ones, and 3 short again. SOS. At first, she thought it was just interference. The storms in that region often caused strange signals. But when she filtered the noise and analyzed the data again, the code appeared once more. Weaker, distorted, but still there. Her heart started to race. Someone out there was alive. Someone was calling for help. She quickly checked the coordinates and realized the signal was coming from the region where Alaris 9 used to be. Her hands shook as she ran more scans. The transmission was old, maybe a few days or even weeks delayed, but it was still active. It meant there might still be survivors. Lyra sent a report to her command center detailing the signal and its origin. She waited hours for a response, but when it came, it was short and cold. The officers told her it was most likely atmospheric noise or a ghost transmission. They said the colony was already considered lost and that no rescue operation would be approved without confirmation. "Stand down," they said. "False positives happen all the time." But Lyra couldn't shake the feeling that it was real. The signal had rhythm, structure, human intent. It wasn't random static. It was someone's last attempt to be heard. She decided to check the raw data again. Line by line, she replayed the transmission. Between the static bursts, she could hear faint human words. The voice was distorted, but one sentence stood out clearly. "We are still here. Please." Those words hit her like a spark in the dark. She knew she couldn't ignore it. Even if command dismissed it, she couldn't just sit and do nothing while people begged for help. She remembered her father's words. He had been a miner on a dangerous moon and always said, "If you hear a cry in the dark, you answer, no matter who tells you not to." So, Lyra made her decision. She stayed after her shift ended, keeping the listening post active. For 2 more nights, she recorded every fragment of the signal, cleaning the data and amplifying it piece by piece. She didn't sleep much. Her small room was filled with the constant hum of machines and the flickering glow of holographic screens. On the 3rd night, she finally decoded a partial message. It was from the colony leader of Alaris 9. His voice cracked as he said they had lost communication, that the storms had destroyed their equipment, and that they were running out of oxygen and power. "If anyone hears this," the voice said, "we need help. We can't hold out much longer." Lyra leaned back in her chair, her eyes burning from exhaustion, but her heart filled with determination. She tried again to send the updated report, attaching her evidence and a detailed analysis. Hours later, the reply came. Rejection again. The higher-ups didn't want to waste resources on what they called a dead planet. They said even if survivors existed, sending a rescue team there would be suicide. The storms, the terrain, the creatures, everything on Alaris 9 was deadly. Lyra slammed her fist on the console. It wasn't right. She had proof, but no one wanted to listen. She stared at the blinking signal on her screen, that small pulsing light that refused to die, and made a choice that would change everything. If no one else would act, she would find a way to make someone listen. She began transmitting the SOS data to other networks, bypassing her official channels. It was a risk that could cost her job, maybe even her freedom. But she didn't care. The people on that planet didn't have time for rules or politics. They needed help. For hours, she sent the signal to every open frequency she could reach: civilian relays, exploration ships, even old mining satellites. She prayed that somewhere out there, someone would see it and decide to answer. Her screens filled with rejection messages, failed transmissions, and silence. But she kept going. Her small post became a beacon of hope hidden in the middle of nowhere. Then, something unexpected happened. On one of her long-range scanners, she saw a ping. A ship had received the signal. It was far away, traveling in a different sector entirely. The ID code identified it as belonging to a human vessel, a Deathworlder ship. Lyra froze for a moment. Everyone in the galaxy knew about Deathworlders, the humans of Earth. They were feared and respected in equal measure. Their planet was known as one of the most dangerous worlds in the universe, full of predators, diseases, and deadly weather. The fact that they had survived there made them tougher than any other species. People whispered stories about them, some calling them heroes, others monsters. Lyra didn't know what to expect. Would they even care? Would they respond? But a part of her hoped that if anyone could survive Alaris 9 and save the colonists, it would be them. Humans didn't back down from impossible odds. She took a deep breath and watched as the signal data confirmed the relay. The Deathworlders had received her message. She sat there for a long moment, staring at the stars outside her window. The cold light reflected in her eyes as she whispered softly, "Please, please find them." That night, Lyra stayed by her console until her eyelids grew heavy. The hum of the equipment became a kind of lullaby, and for the first time in days she allowed herself to rest, knowing she had done everything she could. Somewhere far away, beyond the reach of her station's sensors, the SOS continued to travel, a fragile thread of hope stretching across the void. Most people would never know that a single technician had refused to stay silent. They would never know that her decision had just set a chain of events into motion that would bring the galaxy's most dangerous beings, the Deathworlders, racing into the storm. But Lyra didn't need fame or recognition. All she wanted was for that faint, desperate voice in the dark to be heard. And as the stars continued to shimmer around her lonely post, the signal she had fought to save pulsed onward, carrying a single message through the endless night. "We are still here, please. Help us." Far away from Lyra's lonely listening post, deep in another part of space, a large ship drifted through the stars. Its name was Resolute, a human vessel built not for comfort but for survival. Inside its metal walls lived the Deathworlders, the humans who had earned that name because they came from Earth, a planet so dangerous that most species called it a death world. Their home had shaped them into something unique, stronger, faster, and more stubborn than any other species. They didn't run from danger. They faced it, and that was what made them both feared and respected. The captain of the Resolute was Jonas Hale, a man with a sharp gaze and quiet strength. He had seen more than his share of battles, pirate ambushes, disaster zones, and rescue missions gone wrong. Yet despite all that, he had one rule that he never broke. If someone sent a call for help, he answered it. To him, an SOS wasn't just a message. It was a voice reaching through the darkness asking for hope, and hope, he believed, was worth any risk. That day had started like any other. The Resolute was on patrol duty near the edge of human territory, scanning for rogue traders or damaged ships. The crew was relaxed. Some were joking around in the mess hall. Others were checking weapons or doing maintenance. Then a faint tone echoed through the control room, a long broken signal. The communication officer, Lieutenant Asha Moreno, frowned as she adjusted her headset. "Captain, we've got a weird transmission coming through the outer band frequencies," she said. Jonas walked over, his boots heavy on the metal floor. "Let's hear it," he said. The officer turned up the volume and a series of beeps and static filled the air. Jonas recognized it immediately. SOS, Old Earth code. His heart tightened. "Where's it coming from?" he asked. Moreno ran a few scans. The result appeared on her screen, and her expression turned uneasy. "Sir, it's coming from Alaris 9, but that place is supposed to be dead. The colony was lost months ago." The bridge went silent. Everyone had heard about Alaris 9, a failed colony swallowed by storms, beasts, and bad luck. Command had stopped sending supplies after too many rescue attempts ended in tragedy. Jonas stared at the flickering signal on the monitor. It was weak but steady. Someone was still trying to be heard. "Replay the message," he ordered. The transmission crackled, and through the static came a faint, broken voice. "We are Still here, please. The sound of desperation was unmistakable. Jonas clenched his jaw. That's a live signal, he said quietly. Somebody's alive down there. Moreno hesitated. Sir, Command's going to say the same thing they always do. The planet's unstable. We're not cleared to enter that system. Jonas didn't answer right away. He walked to the front window, staring out at the stars. For a long moment, the crew waited for his decision. Then he turned, his expression calm but firm. We're going, he said. Plot a course for Alaris 9. The bridge erupted in whispers. Some of the crew looked shocked. Others nodded with quiet respect. They had followed Captain Hale long enough to know that when he made a call like that, he meant it. He didn't care about politics or permission. He cared about people. Within minutes, the Resolute's engines roared to life. The ship turned toward the outer rim and jumped into faster-than-light travel. The stars stretched into long streaks of light as the crew began preparations. The engineer, Corporal Nguyen, double-checked the reactor systems. The medical officer, Dr. Lena Voss, stocked the infirmary with emergency kits and oxygen packs. The gunners cleaned their rifles and loaded the defense turrets. Everyone knew what it meant to go to Alaris 9, and it was a suicide mission. But none of them backed down. They were Deathworlders, after all. A few hours into the journey, Jonas sat in his quarters staring at an old photograph of his previous crew. Half of them were gone now, lost during a rescue that had gone wrong years ago. He still remembered the faces of those he couldn't save. Maybe that was why he couldn't ignore this signal. He whispered softly to himself, not this time. Just then the door buzzed and Asha Moreno stepped inside. Sir, we're approaching the outer edge of the Alaris system, she said. But the readings are strange. Massive storm patterns, high radiation spikes. It's worse than anything on record. Jonas nodded. It always is, he said, standing up. Prep the landing team. We'll make contact as soon as we're in orbit. When the Resolute dropped out of hyperspace, the sight that greeted them was terrifying and beautiful at the same time. Alaris 9 hung below them like a wounded animal, its surface covered in swirling black storms, glowing lightning and flashes of burning atmosphere. Satellite debris floated around it like ghosts. The communication signals were dead except for one faint pulse, the SOS. Can we trace the exact origin? Jonas asked. Moreno squinted at her console. I've got it. Southern Hemisphere, near the ruins of the primary colony dome. Signals intermittent, but it's still active. Jonas looked at the storm data. The atmosphere was violent, the winds strong enough to tear apart landing ships. If we go down there, we might not come back up, Nguyen warned. Jonas gave a small grin. Good thing we didn't come out here to play it safe. He turned to his crew. We go in low and fast. Moreno, keep the ship in the upper atmosphere and monitor the storm breaks. Nguyen, prep the drop pods. I want 2 squads ready to move. Within minutes, the Deathworlders geared up. Their armor was scratched and worn, not fancy like the polished uniforms of other species' armies, but reliable. Each one carried survival packs, medkits, and weapons designed to handle anything from radiation to alien wildlife. They weren't just soldiers. They were survivors trained to adapt to the impossible. As they entered the drop pods, the crew shared quick glances. No one needed to say anything. Every one of them understood the risk, and every one of them accepted it. The pod doors sealed shut and the countdown began. 3, 2, 1. Launch! The pods shot out from the ship, glowing like shooting stars as they cut through the storm. The turbulence was brutal. The wind roared, lightning flashed around them, and the ground below twisted in chaos. Inside, Jonas gripped his seat, feeling the pod shake violently. He'd been through worse, but Alaris 9 felt alive, like the planet itself wanted to push them away. The pods hit the ground hard, slamming into the cracked surface. Jonas unbuckled his harness and kicked open the hatch. The air was thin and full of dust. The sky above was dark red, filled with storm clouds and flashes of blue lightning. He raised his visor and looked around. The colony was in ruins, metal towers bent like paper, the main dome shattered and old vehicles half buried in mud. In the distance, faint lights flickered. Maybe fires, maybe survivors. Jonas turned on his comms. Team Alpha, check for life signs. Beta, secure the perimeter. Move. The Deathworlders spread out, moving carefully through the wreckage. Every step felt heavy. The planet groaned under their feet and strange shapes moved in the fog. From somewhere nearby, a low growl echoed. Jonas tightened his grip on his rifle. Stay sharp, he warned. Hours passed as they searched. They found traces of people, old food packs, footprints, broken equipment, but no living colonists yet. Just when hope started to fade, the scanner beeped. "Captain, we've got heat signatures ahead." Jonas rushed forward with his team. They climbed over debris until they reached a half-collapsed shelter. Inside, huddled in the dark, were 5 survivors, thin, pale, and terrified. When they saw the humans, one of them gasped. "You came," she whispered. "We thought no one would." Jonas knelt beside her, his voice steady. "You sent the call. We heard it." As the survivors cried and clung to one another, Jonas looked up at the raging sky. He knew this was only the beginning. Somewhere out there, more people were waiting. The planet wasn't done fighting, and neither were they. Back aboard the Resolute, Lyra Denev's transmission log flickered one last time before fading into silence. Her message had reached its destination. The Deathworlders were on Alaris 9 now, and for the first time in months, hope had returned to the lost colony. The first hours on Alaris 9 felt like stepping into a nightmare. The ground shook every few minutes, and the air tasted like rust and acid. Jonas Hale and his team moved through the ruins of the colony, their visors glowing in the red light of the storm. The planet was angry, wild and alive in ways no one could have imagined. The wind screamed between the metal skeletons of broken towers, carrying the smell of burnt plastic and decay. It wasn't just a destroyed colony, it was a graveyard. The 5 survivors they had rescued were too weak to move far. Dr. Lena Voss worked quickly, giving them oxygen and fluids. One of the survivors, an engineer named Darnell, kept mumbling the same words over and over. "They're coming. They're still out there." Jonas crouched beside him and asked, "Who's coming?" Darnell looked at him with hollow eyes. "The things. They hunt when the light dies." The captain didn't need more warning. He knew this planet's nights could be deadly. "We set up a perimeter now," he ordered. The Deathworlders began building a temporary base inside what was left of the colony's power station. They welded metal sheets over the entrances, set motion sensors, and placed portable lights around the area. Every sound outside the walls made the survivors flinch. As darkness began to fall, the planet seemed to change. The wind grew quieter, the air heavier. Then came the noises, scratching, clicking, distant roars echoing through the ruins. The Deathworlders took their positions, weapons ready. Jonas stood by the main door, scanning the shadows beyond the flickering light. He could feel it. Something was watching them. Suddenly, one of the motion sensors beeped. Then another. A shadow moved fast across the open ground. "Contact," shouted one of the soldiers. Gunfire flashed in the dark as the first creature leaped into the light. It was massive, covered in dark scales, its eyes glowing blue in the stormlight. Its claws scraped against metal as it charged. Jonas fired his rifle, the recoil echoing in his armor. The creature fell, screeching, but more followed, dozens of them. For the next several minutes, chaos ruled the night. The Deathworlders fought with every ounce of strength they had, using their training and instinct to survive. The creatures moved like liquid shadows, fast and silent. The air filled with roars and the sound of gunfire. Sparks flew as claws hit armor and bullets tore through flesh. Dr. Voss dragged the survivors deeper inside, covering them with emergency blankets while shouting medical commands over the comms. Jonas yelled over the noise, "Hold the line! Keep the lights on!" One of the soldiers, Nguyen, ran to restart a flickering generator. If the lights died, they were finished. The Deathworlders were strong, but even they knew they couldn't fight what they couldn't see. As the creatures lunged again, Jonas threw an explosive charge into the open field. The blast lit up the night like a small sun, throwing the monsters backward and buying them a few moments of peace. When the last echo faded, only the sound of rain and breathing remained. Bodies of the creatures lay twisted and smoking outside the barriers. Jonas stood in the doorway, his armor scratched and his rifle nearly empty. He looked at the horizon where the lightning revealed even more movement in the distance. "They're testing us," he said quietly. "They'll be back." The next morning, the team began repairs. They reinforced the shelter, fixed the power lines, and scavenged supplies from the destroyed buildings. The survivors told them everything they knew. The creatures, they said, were native to Alaris 9, predators that evolved in the toxic atmosphere. The storms had destroyed the colony's defense grid, and once the lights went out, the monsters came in waves. They had been living underground for weeks, moving from one damaged shelter to another, hoping someone would hear their SOS. Jonas listened silently, Every story made his jaw tighten. These people had been abandoned. He knew Command would never send another ship, not after so many failed rescues. That meant Resolute was their only chance. He gathered his officers around a damaged table covered in maps and data screens. "We're not leaving until everyone we can find is off this planet," he said. Moreno frowned. "Sir, the storm readings are getting worse. If we stay too long, we might not make it back to orbit." "I'm aware," Jonas said, "but those people out there deserve a chance. We'll make contact with the other survivor zones before the next nightfall. We move in teams. No one travels alone." The Deathworlders split into groups moving through the shattered colony. The visibility was low. Ash and dust filled the air, turning day into a dim twilight. They found signs of life everywhere: handwritten notes, broken transmitters, empty ration packs. In one half-collapsed tunnel, they discovered more survivors, barely clinging to life. They pulled them out carefully, wrapping them in thermal sheets. But the planet didn't give them peace for long. As they were preparing to head back, the scanners picked up movement, large, fast, and closing in. The team barely made it inside an old storage bay before the creatures struck again. They climbed walls, broke metal doors, and howled like beasts from nightmares. One soldier was dragged away screaming before Jonas could pull him back. The team fought with fury, firing until their rifles overheated. The creatures were smart. They learned, adapted, came from different directions. Jonas ordered a retreat. They fell back toward the main power station, covering each other step by step. When they finally made it inside, they sealed the doors and collapsed to the floor, covered in dust and blood. "We can't hold this place forever," Moreno said, panting. Jonas stared at the flickering lights. "We don't need forever," he replied. "Just long enough for the Resolute to get those shuttles down here." He contacted the ship in orbit. The transmission was full of interference, but the voice of the pilot came through. "Captain, the storm's getting worse. We'll try to break through the clouds, but it's risky." "Do it," Jonas said. "We'll keep the beacon active." While waiting for the shuttles, the Deathworlders worked like machines. They repaired the landing pad, cleared debris, and set up signal flares. Every thunderclap made them flinch, expecting another attack. The survivors, now stronger, helped where they could. They watched the humans in awe. These people didn't act like soldiers, they acted like protectors. Even when exhausted, they kept working. By late evening, the sky turned dark again. The wind howled and the storm returned with new fury. The creatures came back more than before, crawling out of the cracked earth. The Deathworlders stood shoulder to shoulder, forming a circle around the survivors. The lights flickered dangerously. Jonas shouted, "Hold the line!" "The shuttles are coming!" The ground trembled as the monsters attacked. Claws scraped, teeth snapped, and the night exploded in chaos. The Deathworlders fought with everything they had. Leon swung a burning pipe at one creature, setting its scales on fire. Moreno used a pulse grenade that shook the ground. Jonas took down 3 of them before one slammed him into a wall. He hit back with his knife, his arm shaking from pain. Then, through the storm, they heard it, a roaring sound from the sky. The shuttles. 2 rescue ships broke through the clouds, engines blazing. Their lights cut through the darkness like twin suns. The creatures recoiled, screaming in pain. Jonas grabbed the radio and yelled, "We're here! Land at Beacon Point Bravo." The shuttles came down hard, kicking up dust and lightning. The Deathworlders formed a line, guiding the survivors inside. One by one, they loaded the injured and weak. But the creatures weren't done. They lunged toward the ships, forcing Jonas and his team to cover the retreat. Every second felt endless. Finally, when the last survivor was aboard, Jonas turned to his team. "That's everyone."
"Fall back!"
he shouted. They ran for the ramp, firing behind them. The moment Jonas stepped inside, the pilot lifted the shuttle, engines screaming as they rose through the storm. The creatures tried to leap after them, but fell back into the fire below. As they broke through the clouds, the storm light faded, replaced by the calm black of space. The survivors wept in relief. Jonas slumped into a seat, staring out the window at the burning planet. He knew there were still more people down there, and they would go back for them. This was only one victory in a long fight. He looked at Moreno, who was patching up a wounded soldier. "We did it," she said softly. Jonas nodded, though his eyes stayed fixed on Alaris 9. "No," he whispered. "Not yet. We're not done until everyone's safe." Outside, lightning danced across the planet's surface as if the world itself was daring them to return, and Jonas Hale, a true Deathworlder, silently promised that he would. The planet Alaris 9 did not forgive easily. Even after the first wave of survivors had been rescued, The storm still raged across its surface, dark clouds rolling like angry waves, lightning slicing through the sky, and the wind screaming with the force of 1,000 beasts. Jonas Hale and his Deathworlder team knew they were far from safe. They had only begun to scratch the surface of what had been lost and what still needed to be saved. The first group had been the easiest to reach, those closest to the main colony dome. Now the real challenge awaited them: to locate and rescue the scattered survivors hiding deeper in the ruined sections of the colony and its surrounding wilderness. Every second counted. Oxygen supplies were limited, storms were unpredictable, and the planet itself seemed to resist every movement they made. The Deathworlders moved out in teams, fully aware that every step could be their last. The survivors who had already been rescued helped guide them, providing rough directions to places where others had been hiding. Jonas led the first team, navigating through jagged metal wreckage over deep ravines and across rivers of black sludge that moved unnaturally under the planet's weak gravity. The landscape was alive in a way humans rarely experienced: plants that seemed to breathe, shadows that shifted before they should, and low growls that echoed in the distance, reminding them that the predators had not given up. Hours passed as they methodically searched abandoned structures. Most buildings were reduced to twisted metal and shattered glass, offering little protection against the planet's elements. But inside some of the partially intact shelters they found survivors, huddled families, exhausted engineers, children too young to understand what had happened. Each rescue was painstaking. Some survivors could barely walk. Others were too weak to respond. Dr. Lena Voss administered oxygen, administered fluids, and treated injuries as best she could while the soldiers kept watch. There was no time to waste. Every delay increased the risk of being caught in the planet's next deadly storm, or attacked by its predators. Jonas noticed a pattern. Survivors had been hiding in small groups, constantly on the move to avoid detection by the creatures that roamed the area. Their shelters were not just simple rooms. They were traps, fortified with makeshift barriers, sensors, and warning systems to give them a few precious seconds if a predator approached. The Deathworlders realized that if they didn't move fast, many of these survivors would be lost before anyone could reach them. They split into smaller squads to cover more ground, coordinating through encrypted communication channels. Every decision was critical. One wrong move could mean death. The storms were relentless. Lightning would strike randomly, sending shards of debris flying. Winds could throw a human off balance, and the uneven ground made every step a potential hazard. At one point, a lightning strike hit near one of the squads, throwing the team to the ground and nearly crushing one of the survivors with falling metal. Jonas ordered the others to form a protective barrier around the injured, as he and Nguyen dragged debris away. Even in the chaos, there was no panic. Deathworlders were trained to respond under pressure, to adapt, to improvise. They moved as one unit, their coordination flawless despite the extreme conditions. It wasn't just the environment they had to fight against. The creatures of Alaris 9 were intelligent hunters. They seemed to anticipate movements, often attacking from multiple angles at once. Jonas and his team faced ambushes multiple times. One creature leaped from a high ledge toward a team member, only for another Deathworlder to intercept it midair with a stunning strike. Bullets, grenades, and improvised explosives became essential tools. But Jonas knew that brute force alone would not win this battle. Strategy and careful observation were key. The rescued survivors watched in awe and fear as the Deathworlders fought. To them, these humans were more than soldiers. They were guardians, almost mythical in their resolve. Every move, every shot, every decision was made to protect life, no matter how many times the planet itself tried to tear it away. Some survivors cried openly, unable to comprehend the courage and determination on display. Others whispered prayers of thanks, clinging to the protective presence of these strangers who had risked everything to reach them. By the third day, the team had gathered the majority of known survivors. Still, there were a few reported missing, trapped in remote parts of the colony. Jonas made the hardest decision: to split the team again, leaving a smaller contingent to continue defending the temporary base, while taking the rest into even more dangerous territory. It was risky, but they could not leave anyone behind. With a nod to Lena Voss and Moreno, Jonas led the forward team, moving quickly through the storm-swept wastelands. The last group of survivors was in a dilapidated industrial complex on the edge of a massive canyon. It was a treacherous path, with crumbling walkways and exposed drops that could easily swallow a person whole. The Deathworlders advanced cautiously, scanning for predators while providing guidance to the survivors as they moved. They discovered evidence of previous failed attempts, broken tools, discarded supplies, and even the remnants of protective barriers that had collapsed. It was clear that survival here had required ingenuity and courage, even before the Deathworlders arrived. When they finally reached the hidden survivors, they were in worse condition than anyone had imagined. Malnutrition, injuries, and the constant stress of hiding from predators had taken a toll. Jonas personally assisted in lifting them into safety, his hands steady despite exhaustion. Dr. Voss administered immediate treatment, while Moreno coordinated the transport back to the base. They had only a narrow window before nightfall, when the planet's dangers would increase dramatically. The return journey was a trial in itself. The storm had grown in intensity, gusts of wind threatening to knock the team off balance and lightning striking closer with every passing minute. The creatures followed, sensing movement and vulnerability. Jonas and his team fought off repeated attacks, each member relying on training, instinct, and trust in one another. They used the environment to their advantage, drawing creatures into narrow passages where they could not attack in numbers, setting traps from debris, and using flares to confuse and misdirect the hunters. When they finally returned to the temporary base, the team collapsed from exhaustion. The survivors were safe, clustered inside the reinforced shelter, breathing in the filtered air and marveling at their deliverance. Jonas looked around at his team, battered, bruised, and exhausted, yet still standing. Every one of them had fought at the limits of endurance. Everyone had faced the unimaginable and survived. For a moment, the planet seemed quieter, as if acknowledging the courage and determination of those who refused to be broken. The temporary base was secure for the time being, but Jonas knew the mission was not over. Supplies were limited and storms could strike at any moment. They needed to prepare for evacuation. The shuttles from the Resolute were their only way off the planet, and they would have to work with precision to get everyone aboard safely. There could be no mistakes. During the quiet moments, the survivors spoke to Jonas and his officers. They shared stories of life under constant threat, of fear and hope intertwined, of watching friends and family disappear into the darkness. Jonas listened carefully, understanding more deeply the stakes of what they had accomplished. This was not just a rescue, it was a testament to resilience, courage, and the human spirit. As night fell once more, Jonas and his team prepared for the next stage. They reinforced the base, secured the survivors, and readied weapons and medical supplies. Every light in the compound was crucial, a beacon for hope in the dark world of Alaris 9. The team moved silently, efficiently, knowing that any noise could attract predators. Jonas stood at the edge of the shelter, looking out at the storm-lashed landscape. He felt the weight of responsibility pressing down, yet also a strange sense of calm. They had come this far, survived impossible odds, and saved lives. The storm intensified, but so did their determination. Each member of the Deathworlder team knew what was at stake, and none of them wavered. They had faced the chaos of the planet, endured attacks from its deadly creatures, and protected the vulnerable against impossible odds. Every second of vigilance, every shot fired, every strategy employed had brought them closer to the ultimate goal, getting everyone off Alaris 9 alive. Jonas Hale understood one fundamental truth as he surveyed the landscape. Alaris 9 would never be tamed, but its fury could be outmatched by courage, skill, and the refusal to surrender. The planet's storms and predators were relentless, but so were the Deathworlders. They had survived, and they would continue to fight until every life they could reach was saved. Even as the night closed in, filled with thunder, lightning, and the distant roars of predators, Jonas felt a quiet certainty. The shuttles would come. They would take the survivors to safety, and when they did, Alaris 9 would remain a death world, but it would also bear witness to a story of bravery and relentless determination that no storm, no creature, and no darkness could erase. The mission was far from over, but the first major victory had been won. Every rescued survivor, every barrier secured, every predator repelled was proof that even in the harshest, deadliest places, courage could prevail and hope could survive. The Deathworlders had turned the tide, and now the final stage, and bringing everyone home, was within reach. The final hours on Alaris 9 were the most dangerous of all. The storm had reached its peak, roaring across the planet with fury that made the ground tremble and the air thick with dust and debris. Every second was a race against time. Jonas Hale and the Deathworlders knew that the shuttles from the Resolute would not be able to stay in the storm for long. If they delayed any longer, the survivors might be trapped forever, and the planet's predators were still out there, waiting for any sign of weakness. The temporary base was secured, but it had never been meant to hold this many people for long. Makeshift barriers creaked under the wind, lights flickered dangerously, and supplies were running low. Jonas gathered his officers quickly, laying out the plan in precise detail. "We move fast, stay together, and cover every group," he said. "No one gets left behind. Keep the survivors calm and on their feet. We get them to the landing zone, or none of us leave this planet alive." The shuttles had broken through the lower clouds and were hovering above the base, their engines straining against the fierce winds. The sight gave everyone hope, but it also reminded them of the urgency. The planet seemed to push back harder, as if sensing they were trying to escape. Debris whipped around the landing pads, and creatures could be seen moving in the distance, drawn by the noise and light. Jonas felt his heart tighten. Every second mattered now more than ever. Teams moved out from the base in organized formations, each Deathworlder guiding survivors carefully through the rubble and unstable terrain. Dr. Voss attended to the weakest, carrying children or those too injured to walk. Moreno and Nguyen cleared paths, moving fallen beams, repairing damaged bridges, and fending off any predators that appeared. The survivors followed as best they could, often trembling with exhaustion but holding on tightly to the hands of those guiding them. As they approached the first shuttle, lightning struck dangerously close, throwing sparks across the ground. The creatures, sensing opportunity, surged from their hiding places, their glowing eyes reflecting the flashes of lightning. Jonas shouted commands, and the Deathworlders formed a protective line around the survivors. Gunfire erupted, punctuated by the screeches and growls of the predators. Explosions sent debris flying, but every human moved with precision, trained to protect life above all else. One young girl stumbled, her small foot caught in a piece of twisted metal. Jonas was already there, lifting her safely into his arms, her eyes wide with terror. "I've got you," he said firmly. She clung to him, shaking as he carried her toward the shuttle. Dr. Voss caught up, pulling her into the medical bay once they reached the ship. Other team members fended off the approaching creatures with whatever they had: rifles, grenades, even makeshift flamethrowers. The second shuttle was farther away, and the terrain between it and the base was littered with hazards. Broken bridges, deep chasms, and jagged metal forced the Deathworlders to move slowly, carefully guiding each survivor. Jonas stayed at the rear of the formation, keeping watch for predators that might sneak up from behind. The planet itself seemed alive with danger, every gust of wind and distant crack of lightning threatening to undo all their progress. Finally, they reached the second shuttle. The pilot, sweating and focused, opened the ramp while Jonas and his team helped the survivors board quickly. The shuttle shook violently as engines roared, but it began lifting off just as a creature lunged at the ramp. Nguyen fired a pulse shot, hitting the creature in midair. It fell into the swirling sludge below. Jonas allowed himself a brief breath. They were not safe yet, but they were almost out. The last group of survivors remained at the edge of a cliff, where the terrain had been most unstable. Jonas split his team one final time, taking the most experienced soldiers to lead the group. The storm was brutal, throwing rain and lightning across their faces, making visibility almost impossible. Every step was a battle, every flash of lightning revealing new hazards, and yet the Deathworlders pressed forward, refusing to be slowed by fear. As they neared the final survivors, Jonas spotted a family trapped under a collapsed beam. The father was unconscious, and the mother was trying to lift it with no success. Jonas and two soldiers pried the beam off carefully, saving them just as another lightning strike hit nearby. The ground shook violently, but the group was safe. They moved quickly toward the shuttle, guiding the family as gently as possible. The creatures had not given up. From the shadows, several large predators advanced, clearly sensing their opportunity. Jonas and his team fought with every ounce of energy left in them. Each shot, each strike was a fight not just for their own survival, but for the lives of those they had sworn to protect. The survivors watched, terrified but trusting, as the humans held the line against impossible odds. Finally, the last survivor was lifted onto the shuttle. Jonas was the last to board, standing at the ramp while the creatures lunged one final time. With a single blast from the shuttle's engines, the ramp lifted, and the ship shot upward, cutting through the storm and into the calmer skies above. Jonas and his team collapsed inside, breathing heavily but alive. The survivors were safe, wrapped in blankets and oxygen masks, their eyes wide with relief and disbelief. As the shuttles moved away from the planet, Jonas watched Alaris 9 shrink below them. Fires burned across the surface, storms raged, and creatures could be seen in the distance. But the people they had saved were no longer in immediate danger. For the first time in months, those survivors could breathe freely, knowing they had been rescued against overwhelming odds. Back aboard the Resolute, the crew worked quickly to treat injuries and restore comfort to the survivors. The doctors administered medicine, tended to burns, and offered whatever food and water they could spare. The survivors, exhausted but safe, began to regain strength. They told stories of weeks spent in hiding, of friends lost and dangers survived. Their voices were filled with gratitude, but also with a haunting memory of the terror they had endured. Jonas walked among them quietly, listening and offering words of reassurance. He knew that the psychological scars would last far longer than the physical injuries, but he also knew that they had survived, because someone had answered their call, because the Deathworlders had risked everything to reach them. He thought of Lyra Denov, whose faint SOS signal had started this chain of events. Without her determination, none of this would have been possible. When the survivors were stable, Jonas gathered his officers. "We've done it," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Everyone we could find is safe. The planet's still dangerous, but we've proven that we can overcome even the impossible. This is why we do what we do." There were nods all around. Every member of the team had fought beyond their limits, and every one of them knew the significance of what they had achieved. Even as the Resolute set a course back toward human territory, Jonas allowed himself a quiet moment of reflection. Alaris 9 would remain a death world, harsh and unforgiving. Many would avoid it forever, considering it lost. But for the survivors and those who had risked everything to save them, it had become something different. A testament to courage, resilience, and the power of hope. The rescued colonists began to recover, telling their story to anyone who would listen. Some of them were celebrated quietly among the human colonies, but the full details of the rescue were often downplayed in official reports. Jonas and his crew received no formal praise, no medals for bravery. They didn't need it. They had answered a call for help and saved lives when everyone else had turned away. That was reward enough. In the weeks that followed, the survivors rebuilt what they could, carrying memories of the Deathworlders' courage with them. Lyra Denov remained at her post, quietly monitoring communications, but she knew that her decision to act had changed countless lives. Somewhere in the distance, signals continued to travel through space, reminders of those who had been saved and those who were still waiting for help. Jonas Hale and his team returned to their routines, yet the story of Alaris 9 remained with them. They had faced impossible odds, battled not only a deadly planet but intelligent predators, and saved dozens of lives through courage, strategy, and determination. They had witnessed fear, desperation, and hope in equal measure, and most importantly, they had proved that even in the darkest and most dangerous places, humans, especially the Deathworlders, could rise to the challenge and bring light where there had been only darkness. The memory of Alaris 9 would remain in their minds forever, a reminder that heroism was not about glory, medals, or recognition. It was about answering the call when it mattered most, no matter the risks. For the survivors, it was a story of life reclaimed against all odds. For the Deathworlders, it was a reaffirmation of their purpose, to protect, to survive, and to fight for life when others could not. As the stars stretched endlessly beyond the windows of the Resolute, Jonas Hale looked at the survivors and his team, feeling a quiet sense of satisfaction. The SOS that had traveled across the void had not gone unanswered. The planet that had once seemed like a tomb had become a testament to courage. And somewhere in the galaxy, Lyra Denov's signal continued to whisper its story, that even in the darkest places, help could arrive and hope could endure. The journey home was long, but the lessons of Alaris 9 traveled with them. Strength, courage, and determination were not just words. They were actions lived and proven in the chaos of the deadliest world the galaxy had ever known. And in that knowledge, every member of the crew found peace, knowing that they had made a difference and that the legacy of this rescue would echo far beyond the storm-swept surface of Alaris 9.